And welcome to the debate. Today we're focusing on a remote piece of desert that has become a safe haven for Islamists. Al-Qaeda is threatening to execute hostages there, and along with other groups, they have imposed Sharia law, chopping off hands or feet when they deem fit. This piece of desert is northern Mali. Ever since Islamist groups took control there in March, central government in Bamako has been talking about fighting back, but they have done very little. West African countries are willing to help with a military intervention to root out Islamists and retake the country. So are France and the US. Yet, there is nothing concrete. Should Mali launch an attack on the north? Why is it so reluctant to get outside help? And can it regain the lost ground? I'll be putting those questions to my guests this evening. André Bourgeot is with us. You're a researcher emeritus director at CNRS, the French Research Institute. Marc-Antoine Pérouse de Monclos is with us, researcher at the IRD, Institute on Research for Development. You're an expert on armed conflicts in sub-Saharan Africa. Thanks for being with us. We also have on set Pierre Chériot, editor-in-chief of Slate Africa, and finally Salvatore Sages, West Africa researcher at Amnesty International France. In just a minute, I'd like to get the contents of the latest reports on what's going on in northern Mali by Amnesty. It was published today. But first, I'd like us to look at a France 24 story on what it's like to live under Islamist rule in northern Mali.
Alioune, the new Islamic chief of police in Gao, is proud of his prison, inviting visitors to come and see inside. Behind these bars, some 20 inmates living in squalid cells, men accused of rape, drug and human trafficking, and even forging banknotes. 15-year-old Suleiman was locked up for letting someone steal his boss's cart.
I asked my boss to give me some time so that I could work and pay him back for the cart, but he refused and brought me here.
Before the jihadists seized power, Alioune survived by doing a few black market deals. When the town fell into fundamentalist hands, the new leaders promised him the position of Gao's chief of police, otherwise known as the town's executioner-in-chief.
Sharia is for Allah. If we catch armed thieves on the road who are hijacking people and robbing them, we have to kill them. It's Allah who tells us that.
For 5 months, Alioune threatened to bring in Sharia law. Now he's kept his word. Proof, if it were needed, is here in Gao's hospital. 3 amputees. They've lost their right hands, left feet, and only bandages left at the stumps. Alioune defends what he's doing, saying these people were accused of theft.
What we inflicted upon them was God's bidding. We are carrying out God's will, and the sins of these people have been wiped out.
For the last 5 months, Alioune's been taking his orders from Islamist authorities at the Movement for Oneness and Jihad in West Africa. The Islamist groups have controlled the north of the country for 5 months now, and their hold is spreading. They recently seized a strategic post in the center of Mali, and they're laying down the law. Alcohol, cigarettes, music and dancing are now all forbidden. Initially, local people were reassured by heightened security levels. Now they're living under a hardline interpretation of Islamic law.
All right, I'd like to go to you, Mr. Sages. You're a West Africa researcher at the Amnesty International France. You co-authored a report that Amnesty published this morning based on the observations of your team that just came back from Mali. Can you give us the main outlines of that report?
Yes, the main outlines is that in the north now the situation is worsening very seriously. Since August we have witnessed 7 amputations, and we were able to meet one of these amputees who fled to Bamako and who told us in what conditions he was amputated. He was accused of stealing livestock. He was judged by the chief of the local chief.
We're seeing the cities, by the way, where your team went to report.
Yes.
And it has to be said, they could not actually access northern Mali.
No. It's far too dangerous, effectively.
Before you resume, I'd like to read what you're about to tell us, the statement in your report by this livestock farmer that you interviewed. I'd like to read, he explains in his own words what happened to him. He says, I was sitting in the middle of more than 10 people, including the Mujao chief, forming a circle. Now, to our viewers, I have to say Mujao is an Islamist group movement for the unity of jihad in Western Africa. The questions did not last more than 10 minutes. The majority said I was guilty and that they needed to apply the Sharia by cutting off my right hand at the wrist. I protested. I told them that it was unfair. I was taken to the Ansongo public square. People had been called to attend the amputation. Then the Mujahid chief said Allah Akbar before starting to cut my wrist. He did it in such a way so as to avoid the bones of my hand only hitting the joints. Before my hand was amputated, the owner of the stolen cattle had come forward to say that the animals had been found. This is by a livestock farmer who was living in northern Mali and who had been accused, wrongly accused it seems, of having stolen cattle. Sorry, please.
Yes, and effectively, the 7 cases which we have investigated on are people who are accused, who have been accused of stealing. They have been tried by sham trials, by people who are accusing them. They had no defense lawyers, they had no appeal, and in 10 minutes, they were sentenced and amputated. In one of the cases, for example, the family, after the sentence, tried to collect the money to compensate the family in order to save the health of their relative. And while they were collecting the money, the sentence was carried out. And in the cases that we have investigated, the population were summoned to attend the amputation. And even though, as you know, segments of the population protested against these amputations, they are going on and on. This is one thing. The second thing, very worrying, is that we are still collecting information of sexual violence against women and girls.
Perpetrated by the Islamist rebels themselves?
Yes, we are speaking in the report of the case of one member of the ACMI police in Tombouctou.
When you say ACMI, you mean Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, the North African branch
exactly.
of Al-Qaeda.
It's a Burkinabe police member. He has been convicted as the raper of this 14 years girl. He was sentenced, notably, to be expelled from the police, but to our knowledge, he's still in the police. So there are double standards. A poor guy who is accused wrongly or rightly
of stealing cattle gets his hands cut off.
Someone
and a policeman
who
is a rapist gets to keep his job.
The third main finding, very worrying, is the use by the Islamist groups, but also by pro-governmental vigilance of child soldiers. Child soldiers who are being recruited and used, some of them aged 14, 15, 16, 17, and we are very afraid that if there is a resumption of war, these child soldiers might be used.
Okay, so amputations, sexual assaults, the use of child soldiers. Mr. André Bourgeot, when you hear all that, or do you think that there should be a military intervention in northern Mali to retake control of that part of the country?
Well, from my point of view, if there is a military intervention in the northern Mali, it will be tremendous. Because a lot of religious solidarity with Islamists, first point. Second point, ethnical solidarity, maybe from Tuareg, from Niger, from northern of Niger.
Neighboring Niger.
Yeah, neighbor of Mali. One of leader of rebellion of the year 1990 said that if there is a military intervention in northern Mali, we shall not accept that our brother shall be killed with this army. So I am afraid about that.
You're saying these are Tuaregs living in Niger, is that correct?
Yes.
Who are the authors of a rebellion in Niger, and they're saying if there is an attack on the north, where Malian Tuaregs also live, then they will go to support their Tuareg brothers in Mali. That's right.
And the other point, maybe my French colleague shall confirm or not what I am going to say. Maybe it shall be a kind of solidarity with Boko Haram, and with other jihadists from
Islamist
Libya.
Group based in Nigeria.
In Nigeria, and jihadist groups from Libya. And not necessarily only from Libya, but also from Tunisia.
So you're saying jihadist groups across Africa would go to northern Mali and help the local Malian Islamist groups fight the army?
It's possible.
And are you in favor of this intervention?
No, I am not in favor of the military intervention, not at all. It seems to me that it's possible till yet to negotiate the problem, because we have a French hostage in the north of Mali.
French hostages,
yeah,
yes.
And ACME said that if there is a military intervention, it's possible for us to kill this hostage, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it means that the situation is very, very complicated, very complex,
Mm-hmm.
and it's difficult to take a decision about military intervention.
Now, Marc-Antoine Pérouse de Monclos, there's... for the last 8 months, the entire half of the country has been under the control of Islamists. And the army in Bamako has said, we want to regain that territory, but they've done very, very little.
Well, they've done nothing. They don't have the military capacity to do so. So a foreign military intervention would raise at least two problems. And to make a long story short, one would be a political problem of legitimacy, because as my colleague said, a foreign intervention might be perceived locally in the north, whether by Islamists or Tuaregs or whoever lives there, as occupying forces. And fighting for who? For the central government in Bamako? Let us remember that there should have been elections in Mali. The present government, even civilians, have not been elected since the military coup of March 2012. So there's a problem of legitimacy, especially if you send foreign troops. Another problem is militarily. Indeed, there was talks about ECOWAS, the Economic Community
West African States.
of West African States, sending troops there, that is African troops with their legitimacy to try to restore order in the north and the sovereignty of the central government of Bamako. But who would go there? Nigeria, which is the biggest army in the region, is not very keen to do so for many reasons, and I don't have time to explain. And so there were talks about logistical support by countries like France, with this threat on the hostage held by Al-Qaeda and being executed for that. And from a practical point of view, you can expect quite some collateral damage if you send foreign troops in cities like Timbuktu. How would you differentiate Islamist, nationalist, Tuareg, and just the civilians? Who bear weapons? Nobody has a uniform as such. So you would certainly expect a lot of collateral damage that would impact on the legitimacy of this military intervention.
Pierre Chervaux, editor-in-chief of Slate Africa, do you think this intervention is actually going to happen? Because there has been a lot of talk, but nothing's got off the ground. And to the point where one could ask whether Bamako today actually really wants this intervention, whether Bamako really cares about regaining control of northern Mali.
Somehow you will have some kind of intervention. As Marc-Antoine Monclos said, it's very difficult because give you an example. For example, in Senegal, nobody wants to die for Mali, or in Nigeria, people have a local agenda. They want to fight Boko Haram, maybe, but it's very difficult for them to go in the north of Mali.
So the regional allies that could help with this intervention, you're saying they don't really want to in the end?
Yeah, and you can imagine that a country like Burkina Faso, for example, can have a key role because they don't want to see this kind of destabilization in Burkina. Because there is, you can imagine that you will have Islamists also in Burkina Faso and even in Senegal, but it's very difficult for them to do it without military background from US or France. And you don't know...
You mentioned Burkina Faso. Yeah. Let's listen to Blaise Compaoré. He was interviewed by France 24's Mark Perelman very recently, and this is what he has to say about the cooperation between West African states and central government in Mali, the cooperation or lack thereof.
The problem lies with the Malian government because they want to have ECOWAS troops, but not in the south. particularly not in Bamako. But for ECOWAS to be effective, they need an airport, a medical base, and a communications centre in that region.
So, Pierre, what Blaise Compaoré is saying, and by the way, he's a mediator here, an important figure in this Malian crisis. He's saying that Bamako is actually dragging its feet and not really, it's imposing conditions on West African allies that simply cannot be met. Bamako doesn't want soldiers in the Malian capital, for instance.
Yeah, because you also have to remember that in the past, when you have some military action in West Africa, it was not really successful. Let's say Liberia or Sierra Leone, you can have some forces. You can be part of the problem after some while because they start to do business with a local warlord. Then it's difficult to imagine a fast solution to this kind of problem. But what you can also imagine is a military intervention. Like you can imagine that American people are sending some drone, like they do in Somalia. And this point is not impossible to imagine. You can
so
also
drones that would carry out targeted killings of Al-Qaeda figures.
Yeah, it's possible, and you can imagine also that part of the solution is in Algeria, and that Algeria can be a key can play a key role to find a solution to what is happening in the north of Mali.
I'd like to listen, just before I bring you in, I'd like you to listen to a Malian colonel that was interviewed in neighboring Niger just a few months ago, again by France 24's Mark Perelman. And it was an exclusive report. He met several hundred men of the Malian army who had fled to Niger and who told him they were waiting to go back to Mali to reclaim control of their territory.
An international intervention is what we wish for, but the Malian army will exercise all its prerogatives. That is, to reconquer the north. We're currently making preparations. When and where we'll strike, we don't know, but we're getting ready.
So this colonel says they're getting ready. This was shot in June, and pretty much nothing has changed since then. I'd like to get back to a point that you raised. Is there a Malian army capable of undertaking this?
I really wonder, because precisely the coup, one of the reasons of the coup by the mutineers was that they didn't have the capacity to fight back in the north. And they complain about problems of equipment, salaries that were not paid and so on. And things went from bad to worse since then. So there were a lot of talks, nationalist talk about trying to conquer, gain back the north, but nothing was done. And today, the issue is still who is going to send troops in the north, if ever there is an intervention. Burkina Faso, we were talking about it. Let us remember that they don't have so much military capacity to do so. And they had a border war with Mali.
I'm going to ask you to just hold that thought. We're going to go for a break right now, but we'll resume this line of thought in just a few minutes in the second part of the debate.